Welcome to the Thursday, November 14th, 2019 edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Football team getting ready to try to make it 11-0 on Saturday against Wake Forest. The weekly video review segment should already be up by the time you're listening to this. We take a deeper look into Trevor Lawrence's progression in recent weeks. Boy, he is throwing with such confidence. Some of those throws he made at NC State, just wow. Looked a lot like the 2018 postseason Trevor Lawrence, which, in case you didn't know, was pretty good. Also, up on TigerIllustrated.com right now, some Thursday recruiting nuggets from Paul Strelos, so be sure to check that out. Our title sponsor of the Dubcast from way back in the beginning, August of 2018, Parham Smith & Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Blake Smith, a good friend of mine, he's been representing plaintiffs in medical negligence and other personal injury cases for over 15 years. Blake serves on the advisory board for the paralegal program at Greenville Technical College. He recently completed his 10th year as an adjunct pro bono professor at Clemson University, where he teaches sports law. Blake was also featured in a recent Consumer Reports heart surgery risk article. In other words, Blake and everybody else at Parham Smith & Archenhold know what the heck they're doing. Free consultations, 864-990-4581 or online at parhamlaw.com. Our newest podcast sponsor, been with us for a few months now, Blackacre Law Firm, sister law firm of Parham Smith & Archenhold in Greenville. Stuart James is a 1998 Clemson grad, big Clemson fan, just like the Parham Smith & Archenhold family. Blackacre gives you the representation you can depend on when you're on the home stretch, closing on your house, all those documents you're signing, all those technical aspects of it. The last thing you want is for something to go wrong at that point. Blackacre also provides services for wills, powers of attorney, durable, and healthcare. Don't put yourself and your family in a bad situation by not having these important documents. Call today for a consultation, 864-775-5400, or go to their website, blackacrelawfirm.com. That's BLACKACRE lawfirm.com. Okay, checking back in with Ron Morris. About a year ago, we had a podcast with him in which he detailed his struggles with opioid addiction. I've been keeping tabs with him over the last year or so. I know a lot of y'all are interested in how he's progressed since then, so plenty to talk about on that front, and also a heck of a lot to talk about on the Clemson football front, and especially this week in particular, the South Carolina football front with all kinds of craziness going on down in Columbia. Okay, here we go. Ron Morris. Okay, joined by my good friend Ron Morris. How you doing, Ron?
I'm doing fantastic, Larry. How are you?
I'm great, and you know, you have your 99% of the time when you're exchanging pleasantries and the introductory "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing great." It's kind of a casual thing, but with you, that to hear you say you're fantastic, there's obviously a much deeper context to that. Can you I guess we talked about a year ago, you were on the podcast and you were talking about your battle with opioid addiction, and the last times I've spoken with you apparently have come a long way. Can you maybe just give an introductory, I guess a take on how you're doing now with regard to that and how far you've come?
Yeah, I have some fantastic news to report. I am now 2 weeks into being drug-free.
Wow.
And it was a 13-month deal where basically the doctors tapered me off on the various drugs that I was addicted to. And it was just a matter of fighting through it and whittling it down to just one medication over the last couple of months, and then being free of it. I don't have a desire or a need to take any of those medications anymore, painkillers essentially, and it's just a fantastic feeling to be able to sleep with regular patterns now, to be able to function as I did before. I don't like to use the word normal because normal is relative, especially when, or just is relative. So, but back to a routine where I know my body will function daily without the help of drugs, and it's a fantastic feeling. Had lots of support along the way from my wife Kim and my son Luke, and from others, doctors, and it's just for anyone who has an addiction. I hope my story can be relayed to you as you can do it, you can beat it, and there is light. You can find that light at the end of the tunnel.
So just some Cliff's Notes for the folks who aren't familiar with your story. Either they didn't listen to the interview a year ago, or they've forgotten some parts of it. I guess the Cliff's Notes would be you were experiencing some debilitating back problems, and in the period between your visit to the doctor and the surgery, you were prescribed opioids, and then it was immediately after your surgery when you realized you were addicted, because I guess in the 24-hour period after your surgery you couldn't be on any of the meds. Am I getting that right?
That's correct. That's exactly right. Yeah. And no one's fault other than my own for not heeding the doctor's advice to not take so many painkillers. Of course, everyone has a different threshold for pain, and in retrospect, I wish I had not taken so many pain pills, but in the end, it all worked out. I worked through it, and I'm ready to move on. The next challenge.
I mean, one of the parts of this that I'm not sure everybody grasps is, this happens to totally normal people. It's not as if, first of all, you just decided you want to go get high, and you go searching for opioids. You had debilitating back problems, and then on top of that, once you're prescribed those meds, it's not like your thought process is, I'm going to take some extra ones so I can get high. It was pain management. So you're thinking, if I just take one more, I guess, then the recommended dosage is going to be better, and that's how you get hooked. Am I characterizing it correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that the real problems surrounding opioids, at least in the public perception, is they're just a total misunderstanding of what they are exactly. It's not a street drug, and you don't get it from shooting up. You don't get the addiction from shooting up heroin on the street or anything else for that matter. It's an over-the-counter medication that you become addicted to, and that's where the part comes in where it can happen to anybody. It's not it's more of a upper middle class problem in society than it is the poor people out on the street who are taking illegal drugs.
Mm-hmm. Can you? I know I talked with you at points over the last year, and there were peaks and valleys, of course, as you were going through that process of sort of layering away the dosages, I guess, of your medication. Can you take me through what was, I guess, the hardest part of that, of some of the lower moments, like just sort of educating people on what that looks like and feels like?
Yeah, I think the best example is there are early on in the first few months, you're trying to wean yourself of the need and the desire for a particular drug. And when you don't get that, it affects your body. And it affected me in a way, and I'm not sure it's this way with everyone, but it did for me in my sleep. So I would go occasionally 2 days without sleep, or sometimes 3 days without sleeping. And it's just an incredibly painful experience to not be able to sleep.
Yeah.
You sit awake, and there were nights early on where I sat at my desk in my office and just stared at the pills, knowing that all I had to do was put one of those in my mouth and I could probably sleep. So it's a mental, it's torture. It just plays on your psyche for wanting to satisfy your physical needs, and knowing that you just can't do that. That the long-term solution is not to do that. And that was far and away the most difficult part of it. And once I get past the initial ones, then it became a much easier process of just weaning myself of I guess what you would call the lesser drugs. But the early ones were really difficult, and lack of sleep it's a horrible experience. I wouldn't wish that on anybody else.
So that was the challenge, and it was all up to you. Like, and I guess that really normalizes it. You know, the question of, okay, these pills sitting right in front of me. Like, so many people succumb to that very human conclusion. If I take one more, then I'll be able to sleep. I mean, it just no wonder so many people struggle with this for so long.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, I don't know enough about it. I'm certainly no professional on the matter, but I wonder if that tug is what causes. Even there's so many people there who are dying of opioid addictions, and that's got to be what people succumb to it, and they take their lives essentially.
So you said you then moved on to lesser drugs. What exactly? What are those?
Well, they're all opioids to an extent. I just think the dosage was less. So they basically, I was addicted to 4 different types of painkillers over the period, and then you attack the heaviest dosage first, and then you go to the next one, and then the next one. So it becomes a little bit easier as you're moving on. And I experienced the sleeping problems probably for the first. It was a 13-month deal, and I probably for the first 6 months had sleep problems, and then over the last 7 months it just tapered down to where even over the last 3 months maybe I didn't have any problems with sleep. So that's what I meant by lesser
Gotcha.
drugs. Yeah.
And then 2 weeks ago, you said totally free. What is it? Go ahead.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, I took the last quarter of a pill,
Mm-hmm.
and it was on a Sunday night. That's when I took the last one. So it's been a little over, almost 3 weeks now, that I've been drug free.
What's that like?
That's, I kind of felt like I was anyway for the last couple of months. So it wasn't like yesterday I was addicted to drugs and today I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
So it just was, I think it's more of a relief than anything else, but it wasn't any kind of like celebration that, I finally got, from one day to the next, I finally kicked it. So it's a great feeling to know I don't have to rely on those drugs anymore.
I know that, or I think I know that with other drugs such as crack or actual heroin, you're an addict, or alcohol, alcoholics, you're an addict for the rest of your life. Is it the same thing? It was given that, like we said earlier, you didn't go out it was a different thing for you. You know, you're not out going getting high, but do you consider yourself moving forward long term still like in danger of I guess falling back into that? Does this make sense?
No, I don't think so. You know, the only way I would be if I needed painkillers again,
Right.
For any reason. But otherwise, maybe I'm wrong. I haven't really talked to a doctor about it, but I don't have any desire or craving for it anymore. I don't need that anymore. So I think it's different in that respect.
Is there any other part of this that you'd like to talk about or reflect on before we move to much less important topics?
Yeah, that's right. Certainly more interesting. No, I think that's pretty much it. I did a commercial promotion for opioid addictions with Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting experience because I've never really had to. I'm usually on the other end of interviewing somebody who is talking about themselves.
Yep.
And so it was kind of a strange situation for me to be able to pour out my feelings in front of a camera. But in the end, I was convinced by the people who produced it that people will watch it, and if it helps one person in dealing with an addiction, then it was all worthwhile.
Well, I know your interview with us a year ago definitely impacted a lot of people. So more than one person, that goal was achieved there by itself. Just curious, how did it affect your work during some of the harder times?
Well, you know, I worked a couple of little odd jobs, and it affects you from a standpoint of nobody can work without sleep.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of days where I'm sure my production was, and there were days where I called in sick, just because I wasn't thinking properly. But that's the only thing for me, and at least, was the lack of sleep affected my work more than anything else.
Yeah, I know you still do some freelance writing, and I know in my case at least, if I don't have a clear head, and I ain't gonna write very well. I'm sure it was similar, deal with you and when you were doing some writing.
Yeah, and Larry, when it comes to writing, you have to. I've always thought one of the biggest ingredients to successful writing is having confidence in your writing, and boy, it's hard to have confidence when you don't even know if you can sit down at the keyboard and type.
Wow.
So yeah, that your confidence gets shaken pretty easily. So true.
Okay. Boy, recent weeks down in Columbia, I tell you, things are.
You're going to jump right into it, aren't you?
Well, it's kind of topical. I actually just wrote about it. Sort of wrote about it yesterday, just about how Clemson, with all these dumpster fires raging elsewhere, with people paying all these all exorbitant sums of money in buyouts, and Clemson is kind of this oasis, and it's just such a stark contrast, not just with South Carolina, but between Clemson and other schools as well, Florida State, various others. But I have to begin by, I knew you'd love this. So the mess on the field is a big enough mess, probably not as much of a mess off the field with the trustees and the president and all that. But after the Appalachian State loss last week, I was on the I was just sort of perusing the Gamecock message boards, and this was after Muschamp's press conference, and you had fans who were irate that the reporters were being too friendly, and they weren't asking the tough questions of Muschamp. And somebody actually said, "We need Ron Morris back." And I'm not sure it was tongue-in-cheek either. And it just goes to show you how the fan psyche, I mean, it can go from, expecting nothing but homerism during some of the good times to when things are really bad. They want somebody to grill that head coach and to go after him. Just crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, it is. That is. One thing about the situation in South Carolina that I've always held as a personal belief is that I never believed and I never called for the firing of a coach with one exception in my career, and that was for a different circumstance. But I never thought it was the job of the media to hire and fire coaches. And so for somebody to write that, Will Muschamp should be fired, I just think that's wrong. I think it's our job in the media to evaluate the situation, but it's the job of the athletic director and the university president or whoever else is involved to do the hiring and firing. You can make suggestions, but to call for somebody to be fired, I've never thought that was part of my job.
Well, it's interesting. Like nowadays, it seems like there's this pressure to have a take on everything.
Yeah.
And you were a columnist, and so, you're supposed to have takes. But
Sure.
Now it's like even like the beat writer, the average beat writer who's supposed to be, who doesn't sort of work in opinion, he works in reporting. And so, but even there's
Right.
that pressure on those sort of down the middle reporters to have a take on whether a coach should be fired or not. And go ahead.
I think what happens now is that, and I don't want to be critical of any paper or reporter, but I think it was the Greenville News this week reported that the president of University of South Carolina said that Will Muschamp is his coach until the end of the year, and he'll be evaluated at the end of the season, as all coaches are. To me, that wasn't a story. I mean, he said in his comment that this is the way every coach is treated. So what's the story there? The story to me was, why is the president of the university involved in commenting on the status of a head football coach?
Yeah.
I mean, at least publicly anyway. I mean, I don't understand why he's involved at all. Isn't that what the athletic director does?
Well, it's funny you say that because after, I guess it was Manny Robinson who wrote that article in the interview with South Carolina's president, I commented on Twitter, I said, I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but South Carolina's president is talking more like an AD than president here, which presumably should make the actual AD very uncomfortable.
Yeah, you would think, wouldn't you?
And then toward the end of the story is where some of I thought the more eye-opening quotes is when he's like talking about the finer points of the football season, like if you play disciplined football, then you're not going to have turnovers. You're not going to have the penalties. We need to be more disciplined. If you're going to win games in the SEC, you better put about 30 or 35 points on the board. You only get the ball 10 or 12 times a game, which, I mean...
Doesn't he have bigger things to worry about?
Yeah, and then toward the end, the most revealing quote, at least in my opinion, was the very last line of the article when the topic had turned to the rivalry with Clemson and trying to turn that around. and he said it was a failed philosophy at West Point to stop talking about beating Navy. You have to create a culture of excellence, and that's part of excellence. And then he said, well, I guess obviously the context there, Army has won each of the last 3 games against Navy, so they've turned that around. So in the context of talking about changing the tenor of the rivalry with Clemson, Caslin says, I changed it at West Point. I'm going to change it here at USC. The I instead of we just, to me, was startling that he's speaking, that he used that terminology as the president.
I've never been around a school where a president was that involved in the process of a football program. And maybe that's the way it works at Army, and maybe it'll work at South Carolina. But where's Ray Tanner? I haven't heard any comments like that from him.
Yeah. I mean,
I think what you have at South Carolina, and this is me just observing from afar, I don't have any insider information, but it sure looks like the hiring, the way the athletic director was hired and the way the president of the university was hired, the result of all that is you have a dysfunctional operation. Because it's like when if you get into a relationship with a woman and you're already dating a woman, or the other way around, if you're dating a man and you get in a relationship with another man, that second relationship, no matter how it plays out, is not going to work.
right.
Because it's founded on bad principles. And really, the hiring of Ray Tanner and the hiring of the university president they were hired on bad principles. There wasn't a good foundation to begin with. And it usually doesn't work.
Big supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center. Family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home and the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff. Give them a call, 864-642-6183, or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com. A great friend of the Clemson Dubcast and winner of the Clemson Area Chamber of Commerce Business of the Year Award, Founders Federal Credit Union. If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers, and all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Membership at Founders has many benefits: great rates on loans and savings products, advice on investments and insurance products, and even a Clemson debit card available for any Founders member with a checking account. Founders Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the NCUA. If you're in Clemson, stop by and see Matt and his staff, 680 Old Greenville Highway, Suite 300, right next to the Walmart Neighborhood Market. So the other jaw-dropping development this week was various Board of Trustee members who were called by reporters at the state. Basically, we're going back and forth over whether they would be able to afford Will Muschamp's buyout. I think they had one or two of them that said they thought they could, but then others said no. But the mere fact that you have a sitting head coach who's trying to get ready for a game this week, and you have trustees that are out there expressing differences of opinion on whether you can afford to fire the coach, that is just that's amazing.
One more example of just a dysfunctional operation.
So what? All right. How do you explain it? Okay, so I talked to somebody yesterday who sort of speculated that part of the reason. And this is really nothing new. There's been dysfunction with their leadership down there. I mean, that's been a bit of a common theme. I don't think I'm being unfair there. Historically, is it the proximity is it being in the capital city, the fact that a number of those trustees are former politicians, that you get that political influence involved, and so therefore you have more of an urge, I guess, for them to speak their minds publicly on stuff like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that could be it. I've always thought in South Carolina's case, it was a matter of several members of the Board of Trustees, and beyond the current ones, way back as long as I can remember, have had far too much input and far too much influence on the athletic department. And essentially those 2 or 3 or 4 acted as athletic director. They controlled everything, every part of the operation. And it just doesn't work that way. You can't have that kind of fingers in the pie operation. And the one period where USC kind of escaped that was when Eric Hyman was the athletic director. And he basically stood up to the Board of Trustees and said, we're going to do it my way. And he came up with a master plan for how to move that athletic department in the future. And they found success in just about every level of competition. And they financially, they got on solid ground. Everything moved forward. And then he basically got pushed out. And now you're back to the way it was before.
With too many cooks in the kitchen.
Too many cooks, and it's usually the same 3 or 4 who are pulling all the strings in the athletic department.
So, I'm not intimately familiar with the goings on down there beyond just the surface level stuff that we've been talking about in the papers. But I know that at Clemson, that in the past, they had issues with trustees maybe being too involved and too involved in athletics, throwing their weight around. But there was a definite shift away from that at some point. I don't know when, but a long time ago.
Yeah, I'm guessing it was when you had a strong university president who stood up to the board and said, I have trust in my athletic director. He's running the show.
Yeah. And a very, on the very rudimentary level of speaking to the media, Clemson's trustees have a very, I think, strict protocol for, hey, if you had a reporter from, say, the Greenville News or the State or somebody or me, who, before they were to vote on some important issue, called up various members of the board, we would all be told the same thing. Please call the chairman. He speaks for the board. And that's such an important fundamental,
Yes, that's the way it's supposed to work.
I just can't imagine, and I don't think Muschamp, I don't think he's a very good coach. So this isn't me, advocating for him as much as advocating for the head coaching position there or anywhere. Like, put yourself in his shoes when 2 stories come out about, featuring the president and the trustees talking about the prospect of you being fired. You're not only getting ready for a game, you're trying to recruit. You're trying to hold on to a recruiting class. You're trying to also hold on to, now in the age of the transfer portal, you're trying to recruit your own players and to project an image of, okay, everything's going to be okay, an image of strength. And then it seems like people on the outside are do you think this could be calculated, that they're trying to put pressure on him or trying to just drum up enough, funds for a buyout or anything like that?
I don't know. I don't have enough of the inner workings to it. There are two things at play, though, I think. One is the buyout. And the buyout was placed at this level last year, as I understand it, last December,
right,
after the regular season. And I didn't understand it at the time, and I even more so don't understand it now. But usually you put a really high price tag or a buyout on a coach who's in great demand.
Right.
Now, I'll give you an example of I grew up in Wyoming, and the University of Wyoming a long time ago went through a period where they couldn't keep a coach for more than a year because it was a stepping stone. They'd come in, they'd coach there for a year, and they'd go somewhere else in football and men's basketball. So they changed their contracts so that if you left after a year, you had to pay a handsome sum to Wyoming to leave. And essentially, they were extorting the next school that they were going to go to. But it made sense to try and keep their coaches there over a longer period of time. This one made no sense. I don't know of any program in the country that was interested in Will Muschamp at that time. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I don't think there were other programs around the country banging on his door saying, please come coach us. So yeah. Why would you give that kind of buyout to a coach? And you can say, well, that's just the way it is in college athletics. I don't think it is to that extent, not universally. And in almost every other case, the big buyout is because they want to make sure they keep that coach there and some other school doesn't poach on their program.
Yeah, this smacks of an AD losing at the negotiating table over much more skilled agent types who do this stuff for a living.
Yes, it really does. And I don't know that that's true, but you sure get that feeling that that's what happened. The other element to Muschamp that I found fascinating, particularly from a South Carolina fan standpoint, is that how quickly they forget Steve Spurrier's first 4 and 5 years at USC.
Right.
And after 4 years at USC, Spurrier was 28 and 22. And at the end of his fourth year now, Muschamp is 26 and 23, essentially the same record. And there weren't many cries to get rid of Spurrier at that point. Most people were saying, you got to give him 5 years. Well, let's move ahead a year. After 5 years, in that fifth year, he went 7 and 6, and they lost to a mediocre Connecticut team and a really bad bowl in Birmingham, Alabama. And then they began to scream for Spurrier's head. And that's conveniently been forgotten, but most USC fans wanted Spurrier gone after 5 years.
Well, the way I remember it, because that 2009 year was when they beat Clemson. Finally.
Yes.
So, as I recall, going into that game, there were rumblings of, okay, maybe are they going to maybe force him out? Try to do some arrangement where you can publicly say, he walks into the sunset and retires, but all the while you're sort of pushing him out. But then he beats Clemson, and I think even after they looked so bad in the Papa John's Bowl that year, I think even after that, fans were still happier over the win over sort of tarnishing Clemson's season than they were.
I'm not so sure about that because of the way that Connecticut game went down.
Right.
If you remember, assistant coach got into a fist fight with a player in the locker room after the game.
I forgot about that.
And also 5 or 6 players left the bench and left before the game was over and went to the locker room. And then there was all kinds of, and one of the players, I don't know if it was Stephen Garcia maybe, cried during the press conference after the game. That program was a mess. And I don't think fans were very supportive. I do remember I have a really good friend who is a big USC fan who went to that game and said he was never going to another USC bowl game ever. And they were ready to quit on him. And so, but that's all that. Even if they were still supportive in some way because they beat Clemson, they're not giving Muschamp the same breaks that they gave Spurrier for sure.
Well, and that's why, that goes back to, and I think we talked about this a year ago. I think we talked the week of the South Carolina-Clemson game a year ago, but I think we agreed, but I maintain that Will Muschamp has the hardest job of any South Carolina coach ever because of who he followed, Steve Spurrier, who set the bar so high of 11 wins 3 years in a row, but also left him with nothing talent-wise, who fell asleep at the wheel in recruiting. And then on top of that, you have to deal with Clemson, going against Clemson in recruiting, Georgia in recruiting, as those two schools are recruiting like gangbusters. And now you have North Carolina with Mac Brown entering the recruiting game. They're a lot more formidable on the recruiting trail. And so I don't know if they did make a change, whoever they got is going to be facing the same just brutal task of trying to recruit well enough and win enough games, to satisfy the masses.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough job. One of the things that when Spurrier was hired, he said they've got to make it South Carolina the cool place for recruits to go play, and he did that.
Yeah.
It took him 7 years to do that, but he did it. And he didn't face. I mean, he had the benefit of facing an SEC East that was down through many of those years, and a Clemson program that was okay, not great, and a Georgia program that was up and down. But Will Muschamp, and I'm not advocating for him in any way. I'm just pointing out the situation. You're right. He faces all the obstacles. They're all there in plain sight. And I don't know that he can ever get South Carolina, that he can do it, get South Carolina to be the cool place to go anymore, because it's now like at least behind Clemson and Georgia and maybe behind North Carolina.
And that's what was so strange about earlier this season. They lose to North Carolina. And I know, I watched that game, and I didn't see a whole lot of difference between the two teams, talent-wise. And so immediately after losing that game, it's fire Will Muschamp. You hear some of the same stuff after they lose at Missouri. And then, of course, you hear some of the same stuff after they lose at Tennessee. I'm sorry, but there's not much difference talent-wise among those programs: South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri. And so I think, again, going back to the bar was set sort of impossibly high by Spurrier, that, that's the standard of achievement that, when you're losing to teams that traditionally, you're sort of break even against at best. When you do lose to those teams, it's fire the head coach, fire and brimstone.
Sure. I think one of the problems that Muschamp has now is that an old AD told me once that when a coach is in trouble or a program's struggling, the determining factor usually on whether you keep him or get rid of him is whether there is hope for the program, if that's still there. Mm-hmm. And I'm sensing with South Carolina that the hope is fading.
Yeah.
If it hasn't faded already, if it hadn't gone away already, there is not a whole lot of hope out there for the future of that program.
The one thing I think you can totally fairly pin on the head coach right now is the offense. He came to South Carolina on sort of a probationary basis in that respect, in that his offenses at Florida weren't any good, and it was like, okay, we're going to hire you, but you better But you better start producing and doing something different on offense. Then he brings in the Kurt Roper, the same guy that he had at Florida, who was largely responsible for some of those offenses. Well, then that doesn't work out. And then 2 years ago, he promotes Brian McClendon, who had zero experience as a play caller. And so now that sort of is coming home to roost, I guess, pun intended. And so that's what he is on the hook for. I mean, you haven't seen good quarterback development with him. Jake Bentley, very promising early in his career, definitely regressed. Ryan Helinski, although I don't know if we can really truly judge him because I don't think he's been healthy for most of the year, but he seems to have regressed as well in his short time there. And so, like you said, the hope, the reasons for hope, I guess the most logical reasons for hope, Helinski and freshman type folks, you don't, the trajectory is not very promising right now.
Yeah, and I think the short-term solution, which is what I don't think there's any question this is going to happen. They're going to retain Muschamp. He'll be back next year.
I think so.
I really think so. Yeah, and number two, I think they'll get a new offensive coordinator. And the way to go for me, from the way I would look at it, is, Lincoln Riley was considered the best offensive coordinator in the country. And was he even 30 years old when he was working at East Carolina?
I don't think so.
Yeah, and he has a brother, Garrett Riley, who is, I think he's the running backs coach at Appalachian State. There's got to be somebody out there who's this young whippersnapper who has, essentially it's a gimmick offense. It's throw the ball all over the place, spread it out. That there's got to be somebody out there who can come into South Carolina and run the same thing here and make it work. And it's a bit of a gamble.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you're in a position where you better gamble because there's not much left on the table.
What, shifting to Clemson, just curious, I'm guessing you've been watching them from afar this year, and I know that you deserve some credit because going into the national championship game last year, I remember you telling me that Clemson was going to boat race Alabama based on what you saw of Alabama in the Orange Bowl, and that was obviously not a popular sentiment going into that game. Most people thought Bama was going to win that game, so I'm curious, moving forward off of that last year and then through 10 games this year, what's your take on what you've seen out of this star-studded offense and a defense that appears to be yet another elite Brent Venables defense?
I stand exactly where I stood last year. Clemson is the best team in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we are beginning to see the slide, if you want to call it a slide, maybe a blip in the Alabama program. I wouldn't be surprised if they lose again in the regular season, and I don't think they'll be in the playoffs. And it's proving once and for all that Clemson is the premier program in the country. It's not Alabama anymore. And I really believe that Clemson is the team to beat. and until somebody proves it otherwise, why would you not think that way? I mean, this is his best offense that he's had. And it might be his best defense.
Which is crazy to think about, given what they lost from last year on defense.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's really amazing what he's done there. One thing I did, you've used these numbers before, but I did want to point out something about Clemson. Make a point that for the Clemson fan base, they need to be reminded of, and you've pointed this out many times, that on the game in 2013 when South Carolina beat Clemson for the fifth straight time, if I remember right.
Yep.
And from that point on, South Carolina is 37-38, and Clemson is 76-7. and what marked that date for me, having been around both programs at the time, was the amount of from the South Carolina end, the amount of taunting. They were a reflection. The fans, USC fans, were a reflection of their head coach. I always said Steve Spurrier was not a sore loser. He was a sore winner. He was a terrible winner. And it was reflected in his fan base. They were terrible winners. And payback is hell. And Clemson fans need to be reminded, just enjoy it and keep your mouth shut. Don't rub it in. Because it might come back to haunt you, as it did for USC.
Over the year we've been doing the Dubcast, we've developed a great relationship with the folks over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. In addition to being a great meeting spot for our interviews we conduct with local personalities, it's also a fantastic place to stay. The Abernathy is rolling out a loyalty savings program for 2019. After your third stay, you'll automatically be rewarded with an exclusive offer. It can be applied to future reservations for the remainder of the year. 15% off rooms, 15% off food and beverage at Taps Bar and Cafe. Learn more at theabernathy.com. Quick word about Uptown Realty LLC, headed up by Patrick Enzer, former sports writer who decided to get into the real estate game. Uptown Realty, locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. They also offer affordable new housing in the mid 130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years, loyal Tiger Illustrated subscriber, loyal Dubcast listener. Website is uptownrealtysc.com.
You know what's really, truly crazy, Ron? You were around, obviously, back in, I'm thinking, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, when that was sort of the slice of time when it was presumed that the SEC was running away from everybody else, not just on the field, but also in the bank account department, because of the television rights deals were just exploding. And then the SEC network comes on board in 14. And I know, because I remember talking about this all the time with Clemson fans back as recently as, 5 years ago is all it was. The existential threat that Clemson fans feared the most was, oh my gosh, this South Carolina program, which has already won 5 straight, is going to take it to another level because of these financial advantages. And what's going to happen to us? How are we going to possibly keep up? And here we are. And it's astounding, because money does matter. And I just wrote something on this yesterday. It's amazing, in Clemson's case, how much money you can save when you're not buying out failed coaching staffs every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it's and along that same lines, you talked about how the SEC had all the advantages at that time,
right?
And it's so true. People have said it before, say it many times, that it's never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is, and it's so true in the cases of Clemson and South Carolina right now. Although in Clemson's case, I don't know how it can get any better. But it's there's going to come a time where it's going to slide, and there's going to come a time when South Carolina is going to come back up. It just doesn't look like it right now.
Yeah, looking at not just South Carolina as they evaluate whether to plunk down $19 million to tell Muschamp to go away, but you look at a lot of Clemson's biggest competitors, if it's not on the field, then on the recruiting trail, that have shelled out untold amounts of dollars on buyouts. Florida, which has been through a turnstile of football coaches. in recent years. Florida fired Mark Richt, had to buy him out. Auburn spent, I guess, $8.78 million for Gene Chizik to no longer coach. And you never know. I mean, they could fire Malzahn in a heartbeat and owe him $33 million. Tennessee, they operated at a $6.5 million deficit in the 2017-18 fiscal year, largely because of various buyouts for former employees, including a lot of football coaches, of course. Willie Taggart at Florida State, they're not just on the hook for the buyout they agreed to when they signed him to his contract at Florida State. They had to pay Oregon $3 million just to end his contract with the Ducks, and they also had to pay $1.3 million that Oregon still owed South Florida when Oregon pulled Taggart from there. So adding in Taggart's buyout, Florida State paid more than $20 million for a 9-12 record, and then that doesn't even get into the casualties of not winning games, ticket sales and all that stuff, and it's just such a vicious cycle.
But when you list all those things, what comes to mind is, do they not learn? Does no one learn from these mistakes?
I mean, people obviously when Dabo is made the highest paid coach in the country, whatever, at the $9 million a year, that sounds, oh my gosh, that's way too much money. But when you think about it in terms of what other schools are paying their former coaches not to coach, Arkansas, for instance, they're still paying Brett Bielema. They're paying him $11.9 million buyout. They're paying Chad Morris a $10 million buyout. So let's say they're paying both of those guys over the next few years $4.5 million apiece a year not to coach. That's $9 million right there. Wow. It's just incredible. It just goes to show you that no matter how much more money is being brought in by, a supposedly superior conference with a lot more marketability, I guess, it's still about hiring, making smart hires of head coaches, and then those head coaches making smart hires of assistant coaches.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And all this comes, just as a warning, all this comes as I think college athletics and college football in particular are going to begin to face some real financial problems in the next 10 to 15 years. When all these TV contracts expire, they aren't coming back at the same level or more the next time around.
Right.
And we're seeing declining attendance. It's these universities and athletic departments are facing, I think, dire straits financially down the road.
And then then that coincides with the players growing momentum for them to get a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
So what did you watch LSU Alabama Saturday?
I did, and it confirmed everything I believed going in, that LSU was a far superior team, that Alabama is not nearly what they've been the last couple of years. I mean, they scored a late touchdown to cut it to one touchdown. That was a 2-touchdown win by LSU.
Yeah.
And there was no question in my mind who the better team was going in and after watching the game.
They could have scored 70 if they had to.
Yeah, I thought they sat on it in the second half, and probably smart, but it's like watching a Clemson game, and they say, well, they only beat what they beat Texas A&M by. What was the final score?
14 points, 24-10.
But everybody who watched it knows that Texas A&M scored with 20 seconds to go or 8 seconds to go. It was a 3-touchdown game. That Alabama LSU game was LSU's really good, although I don't think their defense is great. It's what I think will prevent them from winning the national championship. It's what separates Clemson from the rest of them. They have a tremendous defense and they have a tremendous offense.
Yeah, I tell people, there's still some stuff to play out here, with Ohio State, seeing how good they are. They could be great. Who knows? But I feel fairly confident in saying that whoever Clemson does play, that team on the other side is going to have a harder time stopping Clemson's offense than Clemson's defense is going to have stopping the other team's offense.
Yeah, I agree. One thing about Clemson getting into, speaking of Clemson in South Carolina, I think the happiest fans in the country should have been South Carolina fans in learning that Clemson moved into the playoff.
Yeah.
Because can you imagine if after this week, if Clemson was number 5, undefeated at number 5, playing South Carolina?
I don't think it's going to matter.
Yeah, I know, but I wouldn't it have been the perfect chance for Clemson to make a statement?
Well, what I'm saying is
a rivalry game against the SEC and just beat them by 80 points if they wanted to.
Yeah, what I'm saying is I think that even though they're no longer ranked number 5, that Clemson has dealt with so much grief this season, an inordinate amount of skepticism, that they're pissed off no matter what.
Yeah,
and
I mean, Dabo should he should be, the old Dean Smith. You point the finger at the guy who threw the pass for your basket. Dabo should be pointing at the playoff committee and the national media all the time.
Yeah,
they're doing a great job for him of motivation, aren't they?
I mean, I guess I sound like a broken record. This isn't the first time I've said this, but as of January 7th, the night of January 7th of this year, what's the first conclusion that almost everyone came to after watching Clemson beat Alabama by 4 touchdowns? It's, well, Dabo's not going to be able to play the disrespect card anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and here we are.
Here we are.
12.
I mean, they even had to deal with it during the off season because you had various voices who were still trying to come to grips, I think, with the sight of Alabama getting beat so bad. But they were saying things like, Clemson's easy schedule allowed it to rest up, the entire year, and Alabama was just too exhausted from that brutal SEC schedule, and it doesn't make any sense. Because you look at Alabama's schedule right now, which is not much different from last year's. They still haven't played a team other than LSU. They don't have a ranked team on the schedule.
Who have they beaten?
Their best win would be A&M, which obviously Clemson beat A&M too. Their second best win would probably be South Carolina, a 4-8. Well,
4-6,
4-16. So that whole notion, and then I think Clemson should have been dinged some for its 1-point win over North Carolina, but it was the hysteria over Trevor Lawrence, throwing picks here and there, and the downgrading was a bit much. And I think the best way to put it, at least the best way I can put it, is that as of when Clemson was ranked 5 last week, had Alabama won last year's national title by 4 touchdowns and had won 24 straight games and had the exact same resume as Clemson, there's no way in hell Alabama would have been number 5.
They would have been number 1.
There's a double standard. There's a different...
It truly is.
I don't know if they would have been number 1. They wouldn't have been 5.
I think they would have been 1.
You could be right.
They would have been the defending champions and undefeated.
You could be right. You could be right. And the crazy thing now, Ron, is the same people who will, I guess, voice support of Alabama being in the playoff based on the quote-unquote eye test are the same people who, before this past Saturday, with their so-called eye tests, weren't looking closely enough at Alabama's defense all year, which had shown cracks all year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, anybody who watched the Alabama-South Carolina game
right.
saw that was not a great team. to me, the South Carolina game was equivalent to Clemson's game against North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't play very well, and they weren't a great team that day. And of course, they did end up winning by 3 touchdowns, I think.
If you run a business that conducts credit card transactions with customers, you got to learn about Tandem Payment. Credit card processing company has offices throughout the Southeast, but the one in Greenville in the upstate, headed up by a 2005 Clemson grad. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. Tandem has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and was awarded the Better Business Integrity Award in 2013. Check them out at tandempayment.com.
So you think this is the end of the Saban dynasty?
I think we're beginning to see they peaked, and we're now beginning to see you can call it a decline. If a decline is losing 2 games in a year, we're beginning to see that. The fact that they at times have started 4 freshmen on defense, tells you something's different. And that's not just because they lost all these players to the NFL. No, that's because they haven't been building depth on defense. 4 freshmen in most games, 3 freshmen on defense. To me, tells you everything you need to know about Alabama, where the program is.
Yeah, for sure. The defense that allowed 44 to Clemson last year was significantly better than this defense.
Yes.
Because they had a pass rush and better linebackers last year, I think.
Yeah. And you're also seeing a different style of play from Alabama, which, they built their dynasty on a really stout defense all the way around and pounding, relentless running game that just wore you out. And I don't see it now. Now maybe they're just changing their style, but that usually is a pretty good signal that something's different.
I wonder if going. I think it was the right move when you have the talent they have on offense with Tua and those receivers. I think it's the right move to utilize those weapons. Sure. But I wonder if, when you're practicing against that more finesse approach every day, whether that makes your defense softer. They look like a soft defense to me.
Huh. Interesting. But they also, even with those weapons, they don't come out on first down and pound you. They don't gash you for 8 yards on the ground.
No. And that's what has bothered him the most, is that they can't control clock and against the lesser teams, they're scoring too quickly, and the defense is on the field a lot. They were on the field for 86 plays against South Carolina, I think.
Is that right?
But early in the LSU game, they tried to run the ball and to sort of play keep away a little bit, and they couldn't do it. And that's what I think drives Saban the craziest. But Ivan Maisel was on Feinbaum yesterday, and he said. He made a good point. He said, you can never see the end of a dynasty in real time. Mm-hmm. He said, he mentioned Florida State when they lost to Oklahoma in the year 2000, a year after they won it all with Peter Warwick and all those guys. He said, was anybody saying that was the beginning of the end? He said, but it happened. He said, Miami 2 years later, losing to Ohio State in double overtime. Nobody really saw that as, it was saying in real time that was the end. Southern Cal, 3 years after losing to Texas, nobody thought they're done, Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting how with this Alabama dynasty, you can definitely see the cracks.
Yes.
But the big question is it in real decline? And just, I would lean toward yes. Number one, because of Nick Saban's age, and number two, right, because of the constant coaching turnover. I think we're seeing that come to fruition, and they're paying for that right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think we are seeing it in real time with Alabama.
So you think Clemson beats LSU if they play? Handily or a close game?
I think they're the better team. Now the better team doesn't always win, but I think they can beat LSU. I don't think that's the only team I see that's close to Clemson, and I've watched them twice. I think Ohio State is more talented than Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
They've got NFL players all over the field, both sides. That team. They're the Clemson. If Clemson's the best team in the country, then Ohio State's the second best. And I don't care what people say about the Big Ten or whatever. They say the same thing about the ACC. That Ohio State team is loaded. I work for a company that provides spotter boards for radio and TV announcers.
Yeah.
And when I did the Ohio State board before the season started, I was just blown away by every single player was an All-American. They're all Big Ten. The entire team is all Big Ten. And of course, they could lose this week. I don't know who they're playing, but I'd be surprised if I'm saying if they're not 2-3 in the playoffs, then Ohio State and Clemson are going to play for the national championship.
It would almost be better for Clemson if they got Ohio State in the semi, because that'd give Venables 3 weeks to prepare for Justin Fields and that offense.
Yeah. Boy, they're fun to watch. They're a lot like Clemson. They just beat the snot out of people.
Well, Ron, it's been great catching up, and one of the times we spoke a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, you said, "Do you appreciate what you're able to cover up there?" And I said, yes, I do, every single day. It's pretty crazy that they're at the level they are, and really, like, with the way they're recruiting, I mean, you could argue this is the year to get them, because they're not. They're just bringing in filthy talent next year, and wow, it's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's nice you're dealing with good people, and you get the sense, you never know for sure, but you get the sense that everything's done on the up and up. So yeah, I hope you do appreciate what you're covering. What a fun time.
It definitely is, and I appreciate your friendship, and very, very happy and thankful that you're I guess 3 weeks drug free, and keep it up, man. Proud of you and happy for you.
Oh, thanks, Larry. Always enjoy talking to you. Thanks for having me on. If you get hard up for a guest again, give me a call.
We'll have you on for a third time, man. Would love to do it. Maybe after the season.
All right. You take care.
Thank you, Ron.
All right, thanks so much to Ron Morris for joining us. Great to hear that he is back on his feet and doing so well after such a difficult struggle. Appreciate him joining us. Also appreciate our very generous sponsors for their support, including title sponsor Parham Smith & Archenhall Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Most of all, thanks to all of you for making this a part of your weekly listening routine. As usual, we'll be back next week. Everybody, stay safe and stay warm on this very cold week we got ourselves in here. All right, take care. Cheers.